The parliamentary debate has begun, which is expected to culminate in the meaningful votes on Tuesday the 15th of January. I think we've been here before, actually, with little or nothing having changed from the last scheduled date of the vote, which was to have been expected to have been held before Christmas. What's the likely outcome? A lot of speculation going on here, but Matthew Lynn, columnist for the Daily Telegraph and contributor to Money Week, joins us now. We really don't know how it's all going to develop, and indeed, will we end up going through with this vote? Because, as I say, 4 or 5 weeks ago, it all sort of fell apart. But how do you see things developing?
I wish I knew. I mean, a particularly good crystal ball to really forecast the events on this one. It's more chaotic than anyone would have expected. I mean, if I had to put odds on it, I still think it's relatively likely that the deal, possibly with some modifications to Theresa May's deal, will be passed. It might not be passed, you know, possibly not even this month. It might be sometime in February. But I'd probably put about 70% chances when it comes to the crunch that the numbers will be there and it'll be voted through, and probably about 30% chance on leaving with no deal. And I don't think there's much possibility of a second referendum or not leaving. I mean, one of the interesting things about it is that all the kind of Gina Miller stuff just after the referendum meant that Parliament enshrined leaving in law. If they hadn't done that, you'd have quite a bit more flexibility, and actually Theresa May might have the power to stop it or to postpone Brexit. But Parliament's, you know, voted in favour of leaving, and if Parliament could revoke that, but Parliament can't agree on anything to do with Brexit, and I can't see it agreeing to revoke it. So I think you know, the mainstream position has to be that we'll leave with the deal or else with no deal. Of course, we leave with the deal, you know, just on, you know, UK assets. It's very good for UK assets. I think the market's probably underpricing the possibility. The market sees a lot of chaos, but on the day it'll probably work itself out.
And of course, that's the thing, isn't it, about markets? They don't like uncertainty. So I guess any definite
better get used to
outcome,
it, by the way. They may not like it, but they're going to get it.
Well, absolutely. But any definite direction is obviously going to be good. Do you see sterling at these levels pricing in something more fractious then? Do you think that sterling is pricing in a more difficult outcome than you're suggesting?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely. I mean, both outcomes. I mean, I think the currency markets and the stock markets, I mean, in line with kind of general view within the political establishment, they massively overvalue the benefits of EU membership, and not just the benefits, but just the impact of it. I mean, I think they kind of have this position that the EU is this incredibly powerful thing which facilitates all kinds of stuff, and it's just actually not really true. It's a few thousand civil servants with a fairly small budget in Brussels. You know, most of the European economy, and certainly most of the British economy, just carries on regardless of what this stuff does. And most of the things that are kind of flagged up as problems are relatively simple problems. You know, the kind of things that most companies can fix with just a little bit of application and a small amounts of money and a bit more software. So I think they massively, you know, I think we'll probably end up doing some kind of deal with the EU. But even if we, you know, the phrase crash out, you know, it's just overestimate. It's not a crash. It's just kind of leaving a trading block for a slightly different set of trading arrangements. So I think, I mean, they are assuming that there's this kind of cataclysmic impact on the UK economy, and it simply won't be true. And they'll discover that over the course of the summer and the autumn. And at that point, sterling and British assets will think, hey, you know, this is just carry on much as normal. This is one of the major European economies. It's growing faster than most of Europe. There's lots of good things about it, and it's time to get back in.
But how do politicians sell that to Middle England, the Middle England that voted vehemently to separate with all ties with the EU, which I think is probably what a lot of people thought would end up happening when they voted to leave back in June 2016. How do you sell any deal that still ties us in part to what they see as this machine, as you say, civil servants, run by people that are not elected?
Well, you know, you can, if you had about 5 days to spare, we could debate the merits of the deal or the demerits of the deal. I mean, obviously the deal has flaws. I think people overestimate the flaws. The flaws are quite significant, but I think people overestimate them. I mean, one thing about European treaties, and, you know, I've been writing about this for years, you've been commentating about it for quite a long time. One of the things about the EU is that stuff is much less set in stone than you think about it. So there's a bunch of stuff in the deal. I think the deal will just be a starting point. And I think one of the things about leaving the EU, joining the EU and the integration of Europe was a process that went on over many years. And I suspect that leaving the EU will also be a process that will carry on for many years. And actually March 29th will be a step, a fairly significant step, in that we'll formally leave. But it's not the end of the world if we carry on being quite closely aligned to Europe for quite a considerable number of years. I suspect that the UK, once we do leave, it will nonetheless be important. We will diverge gradually, more and more over time from the rest of the EU, assuming it survives. Bit of a question mark over there, but that's probably one for another and longer debate. But we'll just gradually diverge over time. But I think it's always a bit of a fantasy to think that we're going to just kind of sever all ties just like that on one particular day. Probably not healthy and not that realistic. But we will, if we do leave on the 29th, which I think we will, reclaim a significant measure of sovereignty and will disengage gradually.
One final question. In fact, I want to wind the clock back to that point at which we voted by 52% to 48% to move away. Have politicians done it the wrong way? I've been hearing one suggested way of they could have done it was to say, yes, indeed, we severed all links as that time. We've now got 2 years to build a new relationship from zero. Because the way I think politicians have done it was, we had this relationship, let's now try and extricate ourselves from some parts of it that would satisfy the Brexiteers. Have we gone about it the wrong way? Do you see that politicians have learned a lot and they'd have done it differently had they learned all this in the very early stages?
Well, yeah, I think they would have done things differently. You know, it hasn't been a particularly good process. It's been very divisive, as we know. It's been very rancorous. Yeah, I mean, I think looking back, I mean, I think the deal is a compromise, and probably a compromise too far. I think the UK actually had two, in retrospect, superior paths. I think we could have joined the EEA, which have been fairly good. You know, on day one we could have joined the EEA, or we could have left, you know, fairly swiftly of no deal. Because actually no deal would have been, you know, a much easier option if we'd said, you know, around early 2017 as the negotiations started, actually we don't see much of a basis for negotiation here. The distances between us seem to be too far apart, and we're just going to leave in 18 months' time without any kind of formal arrangement and start managing that process. So I think, you know, but one thing about no deal is, you know, it's probably fine, but it's like any kind of, it is a bit of an economic shock. You know, on the scale of things, it's exaggerated. It's not going to be like the financial crisis of 2008. It's not that big of a shock, but it is going to be a bit of a shock. But if you plan for it, you know, as they'll know in this company and most of the city or in any company, you know, if you can foresee it, yeah. If you know something's going to happen, even if it's something bad, you can plan for it and prepare for it, and you can pretty much mitigate most of it. So it might well have been better in 2017 to say, actually, we don't see enough common ground for a deal here. We're going to probably leave with no deal, and everyone should start making preparations for that. But, you know, to be fair to Theresa May and the government, which almost nobody is, you know, the country is so divided that there isn't really a majority. There isn't really a majority for any position. So you can say, oh, this path A or path B would have been better, and it probably would have been. But there was no majority. You have to be honest about it and say there was basically no majority for anything.
OK, well, but Matthew, thanks indeed for joining us. Matthew Lynn, columnist for the Daily Telegraph and commentator for Money Week.